Someone has done that for me. Thank you very much. Yeah, so as you can see, we're recording today's webinar. Just quickly run over who we've got with us today. So from CSI Pacific, there's myself, Andrew Latham. We have Anna Kozniuk, Manager of Performance Programs, who's based in Vancouver. Nick Baker-Bell, ACS Coordinator for who's based in Victoria. Dave Hill, who's our Director of System Excellence in Victoria. And then we're pleased to have Kevin Bowie with us. Julie, are you not able to hear me? Can everybody else hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Julie, might be an issue at your end. Let me see if I can help you with that in a minute. And then, as I said, we've got Kevin Bowie from VIA Sport with us today as well. So we're hoping that it's going to be mostly an informational session today. We're not sure if we'll have questions at the end, but we are recording this, and I'm going to do my best to get this
Thank you so much.
on our website early next week.
Take care of yourself. Have a snack. Have a treat. You're done school, no?
As soon as we've got that on our website, I'll let everybody know. And if everybody could just mute the microphones, that's really going to help us as we move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll share my screen here, and then I'm going to hand over initially to Dave Hill to kick us off with today's session.
Well,
okay, Dave, over to you.
Je vais peut-être mettre une.
Andrew, I'll get you and Anna just to mute everybody. Thanks for that. And thank you everybody for taking the time to join us here for another Powering Podiums. These Powering Podiums, I think, are a really effective way that we can all get together as part of the provincial high performance sports sector to drive some small initiatives forward. So, we've been doing this over the last 3 to 4 years, and today we are going to talk about the great subject of data management, because we at CSI Pacific are changing some of our processes and understand that this will have a knock-on effect to the partners that we have within the provincial sports sector. So just to open up, we'll start with our land acknowledgement. So as many of you know, CSI Pacific is on the traditional and ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Esquimalt Songhees nations of the Coast Salish people. And I think it's a real privilege that we have those 3 locations. And of course, with all of you coming from different,
I think it's working.
Oops, I'll just get you to mute there. Yeah, so just recognizing where you are today and the lands that we work and play on. So the agenda is really twofold. One is a little bit of background on telling the high performance story, and I see all of you as our partners in high performance sport, and many of you have been around probably as long as I have, and some of you even longer. And we all are invested in this, and I take a lot of energy away from that, just knowing what you give and the passion that you give back to high performance sport. But we do live in a province that there are other constraints around provincial funding and things like that, and we know that those constraints have an impact on our ability to deliver sport. So we wanted to really talk about why that data is important, and how maybe we can convey a better story to government. And then the second part is that we will really get into some of the mechanics of the data management updates and how we look to target athletes and our new process and procedures. So why is data important? Let's jump into this really quickly. And as many of you know, what we are responsible for as Canadian Sport Institute Pacific is helping you as provincial sport organization identify or target athletes within the podium pathway. And as you can see, the updated diagram from the Canadian Sport for Life version 3 is something that we use to guide some of the changes that we've made over the last few years to developing criteria for identifying athletes. And I think on the right-hand side, when you look at that, those three concentric circles, the biggest circle is really all of those individuals that you have registered within your provincial or disability sport organization. And we know that that is a really significant part that you play in driving sport within the province. The next circle inside is really what I would call and have called performance participation. And that is a very big opportunity that provincial sports have to provide competitions at all levels to help athletes challenge themselves. But then within that performance participation is a subset of targeted athletes that you would identify with Canadian Sport Institute Pacific. And those are the athletes that you are monitoring, that you have more specific information on, that allows you to identify those athletes are moving towards national team programming. So just a bit of historical, and I think many of you know that we've had this enhanced excellence funding since prior to the 2010 Olympic Games. This chart here really only goes back to sort of pre-2015-16, but having the Olympics in British Columbia was a significant opportunity for the sector to approach government through a legacies initiative and to provide certain amount of funding that could be used to a targeted sport approach. What I've tried to convey here is just the picture of what that in funding has looked like. And as many of you know, that funding envelope has remained largely static throughout the last 10 to 12 years. It has not increased. So there's been a number of decisions that we've made as far as banding the level of funding and the number of targeted sports that are being enhanced through this enhanced excellence funding. So looking at the chart on your left-hand side, you can just see the number of sports that have been targeted. And then at the bottom of the chart just looks at the years and the changes over different years. You can see the banding. So, moving from sports that may have received less than $20,000 to sports that receive over $90,000. As you can also see in the past, the last bar is just that from 2021 to 23, we did do the PSO assessment and have looked at increasing the number of targeted sports to 25. And then I'll get Kevin to talk a little bit more about that process.
Sure, thanks, Dave. So VIA Sport's role in this is to help support CSI in the stewardship of the high performance funding, but also to gather data and information to better inform government around what's happening in the high performance ecosystem. So this slide here represents the F22-23 funding and how it was distributed across the sector. In this previous iteration of enhanced excellence programming, we targeted 23 sports with this funding. A portion of it was also used to target those below the thresholds at the sort of highest level of performance and through a grant process. And that grant process, I'll talk about it in a minute, has been eliminated for this next cycle due to the constraints that Dave was speaking about. So as you can see, on average, like 23% of organizations, this is 23% of all HP budgets that were submitted against enhanced excellence. So that's a big portion of a budget, the quarter there, but the distribution from the PSO revenue pie, you can see how the total of their revenues are distributed here. And then you can see the balance of that against enhanced excellence funding. So where enhanced excellence funding makes its largest contribution to the sector. So right now it is in high performance coach and technical leadership, but we are seeing a small migration away from the focus of this funding being on coaching and driving more towards the enhancements pieces, including enhanced competition, camps, high performance equipment and analytics, as well as the sort of sports science end of it through some of the work that Kurt Ennis does at CSI Pacific, but also just your own support staffs that you're building in through the enhanced excellence envelope. So that's actually really positive to see that this money is going further and further into enhancement and less towards coaching, but that coaching is becoming more of a core foundational piece of the pie in the overall distribution of the budget. You can go to the next slide, Andrew. So in the F23-24 year, we're looking at targeting 25 sports, many of whom really did elevate over the last 3 years their own high performance initiatives within the enhanced excellence envelope, but many who are new to the portfolio. We interviewed 30 sports in the third tier of the evaluation process, and 25 were selected, but many are really leveling up or have been newly added to the Olympic Paralympic pathway. So that's great to see that sort of trajectory there. The data capture this year includes sort of projected budget funding, which you can kind of see on the left-hand graphic here around the way that articulated funding is going. So again, we're seeing a little bit of a trend universally away from HP leadership being the focus of this funding envelope and towards real enhancements to the programs and services, which is absolutely great trend to see. And then you're also seeing like sort of the overall cost of high performance, which we've never actually asked before, but we are trying to gather this over the next cycle to better inform government about the impact to participation in high performance sport and the barriers that might exist and why this funding could be rationalized to increase over that period of time. And the impact here is obviously, but also we're looking at what's the target audience of PD2 versus PD1 within the athletes that you target. So the athletes here at PD2 have a definitely significant lower barrier to entry, but that high performance range where people really need to peak and move towards that podium pathway Dave spoke to, the cost is quite high, and obviously looking to find ways to leverage this with government to advance the investment here. So Dave, I will pass it back to you.
Yeah, I'll just add a few comments to that. I think one is, whilst the funding is maybe a little less towards technical leadership and coaching, I mean, we do still see that is the pillar of running high performance programs. And I think one of the things that we're very, very fortunate of in BC is that many PSOs have taken on those professional jobs in identifying coaches and or technical leaders. And, I think something that we can attribute to some success in BC is just the longevity that people have in those roles. Some more than 20 years in the roles leading high performance programming. So that's been great. And then the other part around that high performance cost, it is very difficult to get that number. So this year we've really looked at a per athlete costing around that. So thank you to the PSOs for digging into that and providing that information. The other way that we can look at some of the data as we move forward here is just around how we target the PSO and DSO athletes. So Andrew, maybe we'll just click forward here. As many of you are aware, there is some sport eligibility in order to identify targeted athletes. The main eligibility that we've always had was via sport accredited status. However, we do have other considerations that we look at within the eligibility requirements. So things like partnering with CSI Pacific. So we do have a long-standing partnership with Whistler Sport Legacies, and they do provide us with a targeted athlete list, also supporting those sports that are in the Olympic or Paralympic pathway and aligning to NSOs that are centralized or have training hubs in BC. As you can see in the diagram, this is on our website under our eligibility page, but during the pandemic, it became important to really consider the nomination pathways. And as you can see here, we work both with the provincial sport organizations and the NSOs to help identify athletes. And I wanted to put this information in because it is central to the data management process that we are going to be talking about later on in the Powering Podiums. How do we know that we're successful? And I put this slide together to look at how we've been able to track athletes over the years. And this data goes back to 2015, but actually we do have data that goes all the way back to 2008. And the data that we're collecting is really around those athletes that you've identified or targeted. And if you look at this graphic, it's really rolling up all of the sports that we have, that we receive targeted athletes from. And on the left-hand side, what that articulates is just the age of the athlete. And then you can see over the years. So it is a bit more longitudinal. And when we can start looking at this longitudinal data, it really is helpful to see changes over time. The blue line is when athletes are first identified by their PSO. So as we collect birth dates, we're able to look at the year that the athlete is when they are identified. So as you can see, that kind of on average hovers between 20 and 21 years old. The orange line is the age at which athletes convert to a higher level. So that may be converting to a higher level within the provincial sport system or converting to a higher level in the national system. But I would say, just looking at that graph, there's not a lot of information there other than just seeing that, you know, there's probably a centralization towards the mean, and that these lines are pretty consistent year on year. What is more interesting, though, is when you start breaking it down by sport. So if you look here, you can see I've got examples from rowing, rugby, and swimming. And again, what it is articulating is the same information that's in the graph above. So you can see that with rowing, the age of identification may be very close to the age of conversion. And how is that possible? Well, when we look at the age of conversion, it's based on a 3-year window. So if you were identified in 2018, we would look to say, okay, did that athlete convert in either 2017, 2016, or 2015? So that's why you would probably see some of those numbers being a bit higher for the conversion, simply because we're taking in that 3-year window. But essentially, when you look at this, you can look at a conversion rate by essentially dividing the number of athletes that were identified at a given time by the number who converted. But this data here is just looking at the age impact, and certainly you can see rugby early into 2015 identified athletes a little bit earlier, and then older as they progress to 2021, 22. And then swimming is quite interesting because there's certainly a peak or something going on around the pandemic. So what this really says to me is it becomes much more valid when we start looking at individual sports and trying to explain, okay, well, why are these ages changing? Why is the age of conversion going up or going down? And why is the age of identification going up or down? And another way that we can look at it is just on the next click of the slide here, the actual number of athletes that are being identified. So you can see on the graph here, the left-hand side is the total number of athletes identified on a year-by-year basis. The blue line indicates those that are identified, and the orange line indicates the number who are converting. So again, there is a difference between obviously the number of athletes you identify and again, the number of athletes that you convert. But what I find interesting in some of these lines is that there is, they kind of parallel each other. But again, looking at this data on a sport by sport basis and, you know, trying to tell a bit more of the picture of what we are seeing within the high performance landscape. So, you know, from that perspective, I would just encourage you that if you are interested in learning a little bit more about the conversion rates and those types of things, that you can reach out to CSI Pacific and maybe we can dig into that data a little bit more or look at other key performance indicators that you may have for those targeted athletes. And certainly some of the work I'm doing with coaches in the UBC program, we are starting to look at perhaps using this data to align it with other metrics that sports may have. So it is important in also contributing to the story that we are able to tell about how our sector is doing with regard to converting athletes within the high performance pathway. So the next piece is just around our data tracking and how we're enhancing data tracking. And I'll start off here, but I'll get Nick Baker-Bell to help me with some of this as we go through. So maybe I'll just turn it over to you, Nick, and you can kick it off with the information on these slides.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. So when it comes down to our management of data, we are moving into a new process. We're going to start out just kind of with the identification, how we start our criteria, and then we'll move in to how the new lists and nomination pieces will look moving forward. Just to start off, all of our information for sport criteria can be found on our website underneath athlete and eligibility. If you are a sport that has a criteria with us, that's where you can find it if you're curious about what you have currently or getting ready for your rollover next year. So into the next area we're kind of going to go over is the PSO will receive an email from myself, Dave, or Andrew, depending on which CSI Pacific contact they're with. When it comes down to that, you're going to receive an email from us letting you know that you're about to roll over and you're going to receive your criteria. What we're going to ask you to do is review your criteria, make adjustments as appropriate, as well as fill in a new criteria document as we are changing some of the wording within this documentation. So we'll ask you to complete that. You will then send it back to your CSI Pacific contact. The contact will then review your criteria, let you know if there's an adjustment that needs to be made within your criteria, or if there's a couple questions that we might have towards your criteria that you can enhance it. We want to see if we can get sports to enhance their criteria a little bit more kind of moving forward and just allow them to have some time to really get an understanding of how we can improve the sports nomination style, but also find how they can get an athlete in the piece. Sorry, Andrew, can I just go back one quick? Thank you. Once that's completed and we do confirm that your criteria is good to go, we will sign off on it. So I will throw this back over to Dave, and Dave will kind of give an example of one of our grade A sports that currently Dave is working with and has worked on the GMP for that. And Dave will kind of go over how it looks and how it's formatted.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And as I presented earlier, I mean, a lot of what we are trying to do is link your criteria back to the podium pathway. And much of that is defined potentially by a gold medal profile being used by your national sport organization. Some sports have well-articulated gold medal profiles, some do not, and some aren't able to share them. I will compliment Tanya McGee, who is one of our coaches through our advanced coaching diploma, who has been working the last few years in a technical leadership role with BC Artistic Swimming, where she really embraced the concept of the gold medal profile and embedding that right into their criteria. And part of the way that they're doing this is to look at how they can use different KPIs in defining their gold medal profile to help identify athlete selection to targeting. So you can see here in this slide that a provincial development 2 athlete is based on a scoring matrix that is on the right. And there's a number of ways that athletes can contribute to their scoring. So in this situation, we're moving away from just purely event-based criteria. Event-based criteria, and what I mean by that is performance at national or international competitions. I mean, that is still a very important part of identifying your athlete, but we also know that there are a number of different other criteria that are also important in identifying the athletes. So you can see that even within this matrix that artistic swimming has, at the bottom, there are some performance criteria, but they also look at how the athlete is able to monitor their progress through the pathway and giving points to certain things that athletes they want to require athletes to do or to have their coaches be compliant on around annual training plans and things like that. And then their engagement in either provincial or national level programs as you move up. So it's a good way of identifying and weaving in the gold medal profile. And we're starting to see more of this coming from the sports as they look to provide some appendices to help clarify their criteria within their criteria document. Back over to you, Nick.
Yep. Okay, perfect. So once the criteria has been signed off and the sport and the CSI Pacific contact have agreed, you'll then receive an approved athlete list or nomination table from us, which will come in an email. You'll also receive a coach's template, which will also be in an email, but will be discussed later in the presentation. So as you can see, there is a few changes kind of on the new enrollment lists. So the first 3 things you're going to notice are first name, last name, and email. Again, email is one of our newer things, so we will talk about this as we go along. And we do know that there might be some sports that might not be able to share this information, and we will discuss that detail further down. The next pieces are going to be our disciplines, sex of competition, and carding level. So disciplines, not every sport has a discipline. So we do get a lot of sports that do import information like softball saying softball in discipline. We just want to make sure that we're cutting that down. Sorry. We are just working on that as well. And basically what we want to talk about is those sports that don't have a discipline will just be identified as NA and not as having an option. There will be a drop-down option that we will discuss as we go along. Sex of competition, this is oriented to just the athlete's gender, not to what level competition they're participating in. So we do want to identify that this is a gender based question and not so much as a competition based question. Finally, the carding levels, again, you'll receive that information. This is all pre-populated. So whatever we have at CSI Pacific, we will populate this in. But those carding levels will be basically from provincial development, Canadian development, and then SC carded levels. I personally will be importing the SC carded information. So if you have a new SC carded athlete on your side of things, just identify as SC carded and I will update that. Some of the new pieces that we also do have is our date of birth. We do ask the sport to be as accurate as possible, and we will discuss this as it goes along down the lines, as age and minor yes or no questions have been inserted, and we will discuss this a couple slides from now. And then finally, we do have guardian information that we are requesting as well. So this is some major changes that have been made to this document. So on to the next slide. Perfect. So the next slide. So basically, what is the process now? So first off, we are sending the sport the list that we had from the previous season. We are asking the sport to verify their list in a few different ways. So whether this is changing a name of an athlete or adjusting the age or level of an athlete that currently is on their list. if you have an athlete that no longer meets eligibility standards, you are asked to delete this athlete from the list. So if the athlete is no longer a part of the program or is not meeting the proper criteria, please adjust that as so deleting it. And finally, for any new athletes being added, I would like they would need to be added at the bottom of your list and highlighted in yellow. We want to make sure that we're keeping track of these new athletes coming into the program and kind of giving a better identification to the PSOs of how many new athletes are coming into the program and how many athletes are leaving the program. So just giving those pieces of addition is always helpful. So those are the big ticket pieces for that verification. Once that's completed and you verified those, you'll move on to your next step. So the first step is email adding. So if consent is given by the PSO, you are able to provide emails for CSI Pacific. That's amazing. If not, you can have a discussion with your CSI Pacific contact as to why you're not able to, and we can figure out a new solution. On top of this, CSI Pacific will also be importing any emails. Sorry, I think it might be a little bit of a, if someone's still got their mic on. I'm getting a little bit of rebound there. Thank you. So if an athlete has completed a waiver with us in the past 2 years, CSI is able to import that information for the athlete, whether it be guardian information or personal email information. So we will populate what we can through our pieces. After that, we do ask that athletes, when you are putting in their birth dates, that you're putting it in correctly and in the proper format. It should be month, day, year. So that way the calculation can calculate it properly. Again, be very diligent and very careful when putting this in, as if you put a piece of information in and the calculation isn't able to be made, then we will ask, CSI will ask for you to re-import that information. Again, once that date has been placed in there, in the age category, you will get a proper calculation. The calculation will identify whether the athlete is underage or an adult. If they are underage, you're going to see that it's identifying as a yes in yellow, and that means the athlete will need guardian information. If the athlete is a no, that means the athlete only needs athlete email and not the guardian information. On the very far hand side is where the guardian information is needed. When it comes to the guardian information, we need the first name, last name, and email address of the guardian for the athlete in question. So those are going to always be populated in a highlighted cell. Again, if you are not able to provide this information, please connect with your CSI Pacific contact and we will figure out a resolution to get to assist. But CSI will provide as much information as possible. Finally, the final section is the regional centers and the city of the athlete. So the city of the athlete needs to be identified properly. So identifying what city they currently are in, and then what regional center that they would be eligible to register with. So we're going to go over to the next slide as we are going to be introducing an additional region in. So as you can see, we have a few different regions here. In the red sections are CSI Pacific campuses, Whistler, Vancouver, and Victoria. We also do have Engage Sport North, CSI Pacific Fraser Valley, CSI Pacific Interior, CSI Pacific Okanagan, CSI Pacific Vancouver Island.
Recording in progress.
One of the new Pacific sports coming in is Columbian Basin, which is a new region we have added, and that will be typically referred to as the Kootenays, and it's centralized in Rossland, covering the areas in Southeast BC. So again, we will have that information. We are creating a manual and instruction guide for this new template that we will be presenting to the sports with their templated current list. And that information will have everything guiding you through those pieces of information. If there's any questions when it comes along to your template, don't be afraid to reach out to your CSI Pacific contact and we'll get the questions sorted for you. On top of that, we do have a new email contact that you will be sending the athlete and coach Excel sheets back to. And that will be our enrollment at csipacific.ca. We will be making sure that that is CC'd on the emails out to you. So that way, when you are sending it back to our contacts, you are CCing the enrollment and no longer CCing the nomination email, as we are changing up that process and making it easier so that we're not tracking the Excel documents in different places. So that is the look and the feel of the athlete side of things. Now we're going to bring it over to Andrew, and he's going to cover the coach side of the enrollment.
So thanks for that, Nick. So just go over the coach eligibility. So obviously looking at those, still these two options, and this information again is on our website. But option one is the coach is coaching a targeted athlete, right? So that's still very important for us. And we're looking for them to be NCCP Comp Dev trained or equivalent, or they've been through the international coaching school with us here at CSI Pacific or Whistler Sports Legacies, and they have the sport performance coaching certificate. So that's a program that we've been working on a number of years, and that has become part of our options for targeting. And then option two is that the coach is an ACD or NCI alumni and is currently coaching athletes or is an active coach developer. So that's just that information there around the eligibility, which hasn't really changed very much. So in terms of coach nomination and enrollment, obviously it's a smaller cohort, and we've done a lot of work up front to get this athlete registration process completed first. We're removing primary and secondary coach designation, and as you'll see, we're separating the coach list from the athlete list. So we're hoping that allows a little bit more flexibility and efficiency in coach nomination, so that you're not having to make sure you've got that secondary line filled and that primary line filled. So again, wanting to try to make this a more streamlined process for you. We're also going to be asking you to add the NCCP number. So that's something that we're going to try to collect moving forward. And we're also at the next phase, when we're registering coaches, we're going to gather some information from them regarding the coaching background. So we'll be asking if they're competition introduction trained, comp dev trained, or comp dev certified. And we're also going to try to collect some information from them around their highest level of games experience. The idea there is it helps us become maybe a little bit more targeted in some of our operations when we're looking to see what type of educational opportunities we can put together. And what we're really trying to do is change the focus to be not just registering and nominating coaches, but trying to support the coach and trying to support the PSOs as well in finding the better targeted education and certification opportunities. So that's kind of where we're trying to go in terms of coach nomination and registration here. So in terms of the process, very, very similar to what Nick talked about, a little bit more straightforward here. So you'll receive this Excel file, the nomination table. You'll receive this with the one for athletes. Again, looking for you to verify the coaches. If those coaches are no longer eligible, we would ask that you delete them and add new coaches at the bottom of this file. Obviously, first name, last name, then email address, discipline if needed, the sex of the competition that they're coaching in, whether they're coaching male or female, NCCP number, and then level of athlete that they're involved in, whether that's regional, provincial. We have a drop-down box there, which should be pretty self-explanatory. And again, if that's a challenge going through this, then please connect with either myself, Nick, or Dave, whoever is working with you. And then the training group, if that's not applicable, and we know that that's not applicable for everyone, but we've left that in for the sports where that would be applicable. So process is very similar to the one that Nick walked you through, and just hoping that this will become a little bit more user-friendly for you and less time spent on admin putting this together. So that's the process there for coaches. So I think I'm handing over to Anna, who's going to walk through the enrollment piece with you.
Before we do that, Andrew, I'll just maybe open it up for some questions. I also want to make some clarifications as you know, we've discussed some of the new nomination process. So number one is we are trying to make this more efficient and effective for the PSO. So we believe that we can actually pre-populate a lot of this information for you. We have a number of athletes that have previously registered, so why wouldn't we provide that information back to you, and it becomes more of a verification process. So from a PSO perspective, we are looking for you to verify some of that information, but if you have targeted athletes that are new and meet the eligibility requirements, you will need to be identifying them. Just wanted to talk about the sort of sex of competition. As many of you know, there is a difference between biological sex and how someone may identify themselves. What we are looking for there, we've called it sex of competition because typically in sport, there are still two, a female and male, but we also recognize that potentially in the future that there are open competitions. But as Nick mentioned, we are looking to the biological identification around that. When we do go into the enrollment process, we do have a question around their gender preference and whether they want to identify their gender preference. So that does get covered there. So just it may have been a little bit unclear in how we were explaining that, but essentially we are looking for the biological identification of that individual as an athlete or a coach. So I will open it up for questions. I saw Toby, maybe you have your hand up first there. So you go ahead, Toby.
Yeah, thanks. So that kind of explained it a little bit, but let's say for badminton, discipline would you write like singles, doubles, mixed, and then sex of competition? Like what if you played singles and mixed doubles? Like what would athletes have to write?
Just it's more the identifier that we've used to identify the field. So if it is a female biological athlete, then you would identify them as female. Essentially, there's only two choices there, male or female, but we know that that doesn't necessarily provide the opportunity for gender identification. So we're just collecting this information in a very simplified way. But as I mentioned, when an athlete or coach goes through the enrollment process, they will have the ability to identify their gender.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Julie. Just can't hear you right now. Oh no, it's one of those Zoom things. I can see your mic is muted now and it looks like it's connected. There you go. That is perfect. Well done.
Okay. So my question was so last year we had primary coach and secondary coach, and they were put in the list next to the name of the athlete. And now we're not going to have primary coach and secondary coach, and the coach is not going to appear in the athlete list. It's going to be a separate list, and we just make a list.
Yeah, that is correct. Because from a data management and workflow situation, we've had to separate the process. But as Andrew explained, I mean, notionally the eligibility criteria is still there, that you can identify coaches who are working with those targeted athletes. So in many cases, there will be some PSOs where they identify their provincial coach, which has some interactions with the athletes, and then there may be a personal coach that has interactions with the athletes. So what we're doing is actually giving you a bit more flexibility on who you can identify as the coaches of those athletes. And, you know, through the coach nomination process, you have to identify the level of athlete, but you may end up having a conversation with either Andrew, Nick, or myself, just saying, oh, okay, are these coaches really involved in coaching the athlete? In many cases, you know, that secondary coach was maybe more of a camp-based coach, and we were fine with that because we do want to use the identification of coaches as an incentive to bring more coaches into the system and to allow them to gain the benefits. The other piece, and thank you for mentioning this, is that through some of the interactions that we've had with PSOs, we do recognize that some of the coaches that are coaching targeted athletes may not actually meet the PSO standard to be identified. And because of the old way we did it, by saying, okay, you have to have a coach identified against that athlete, sometimes the PSOs were saying, yes, we understand that the athlete made that performance criteria, but we're still working with the coach to meet our minimum requirements to identify them as a targeted coach. And in some cases, the PSOs weren't prepared to put those coaches down until they had met those criteria. So you do have some flexibility there to establish that minimum criteria for yourself and the coaches that you identify. So I think that from that standpoint, it's going to give us a bit of a richer identification of coaches within the system. So thanks for that question.
Thank you.
Mamona.
Hi, question that is maybe pertaining a little bit more to gymnastics, but in our case, I believe our 3 disciplines would be women's gymnastics, men's gymnastics, and trampoline gymnastics. And so in the case of WAG and MAG, or women's and men's, since we're already separated by gender in terms of the actual sex of competition, I am not sure I'm understanding still the sex of competition category. You're looking for the biological gender as in the assigned at birth gender. I don't emailing everybody and asking them what they were born with. So can we, in my case, if I'm doing the women's list, so the people that are deciding to compete in women's artistic gymnastics, would they not all just be listed as list?
And that's a good example of applying that notion around the sex of competition. So very clear in your sport that the disciplines are aligned to different biological indicators.
Right. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. Yeah, that was very good. So again, before we turn it over to enrollment, because the next step is obviously once your nomination is approved, we will move forward with enrollment and simplifying that process. And again, what we're hoping that you're hearing here is that we want to provide you with a lot more information to make this more efficient and effective rather than just starting from scratch every year. So Anna will take over and talk about the enrollment process and how that works.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so yeah, I will be focusing on more of the athlete and coach process. So moving forward, we changed a little bit of the language from the historical process. So there's now 2 phases. The first phase is the enrollment phase. So that includes phase 1 of nominations. That's a process that goes through what Nick just walked through. And then the second phase in enrollment is the athlete or coach being informed that they've been nominated and that they can enroll. So after they've gone through the enrollment phase, the second, I guess, phase of the process is subscription. And so what that includes is the athlete onboarding and the subscription to get their athlete card. So we've made a few different changes to that, but as a simplified version, this is really what that process looks like. There's 2 processes to the enrollment, and essentially what this includes as well as if we have some Sport Canada carded athletes who are temporarily visiting maybe for a camp. So we've got BC Alpine that's up in Whistler. Some of those athletes might not be training in BC for over 6 months, but they do have to sign our athlete waiver. So we've made sure that our policies are up to date there, and they can access some of our services and our practitioners while they're here and be covered under CSI Pacific. And then for those athletes that are actually under nomination, they can kind of follow through and be subscribed with CSI Pacific. So Andrew, you can go to the next slide there. So, and then you can click it twice. So we've made a couple of adjustments to our athlete waiver. And if you do have your phone on you, feel free to scan the QR code there in the bottom right-hand corner. And then I've also shared the link to our new enrollment link in the chat there. So a couple of our tweaks in terms of the enrollment process is we've tried to simplify the process for our athletes and coaches going through one central form. So instead of going through an Urbium form and being directed into 2 different links, our enrollment process is all linked into this waiver. So if you want to, again, if you want to scan the QR code and fill us out on your own time afterwards, feel free to send us any information or questions that you might have, and then also direct the link in the chat there. A couple of the high level changes that we've made are, again, it's just signing off on the waiver agreements for the risks, the terms and conditions, and then activity status of discretion. We do have a prompt in the athlete waiver for adults and minors. So if there is a minor, like Nick had mentioned, so in BC, it's under 19, there is a requirement for the parent or guardian to complete the form together. And lastly, again, the back end that Nick just walked through around kind of touching on the gender and biological nature, that's really because it's required for Sport Canada reporting. Where we have changed and have tried to include some of our inclusion processes is self-identification on the demographic information on the waiver. So athletes or coaches that go through can identify their gender, their ethnicity, their pronouns of what they want to identify when they're meeting with their staff or practitioners on site. There's also an opportunity for them to share their social media handles so we can kind of help storytell and celebrate some of their achievements throughout the year. And lastly, what we also included is the policy and code of conduct agreement. So in there, athletes and coaches need to sign off on the UCCMS, the Universal Code of Conduct for Maltreatment in Sport, and a few other code of conducts in there. Dave.
Wanted to make a connection that in the old process, after your nomination was completed, we would have you fill in letters that you would send out to the athletes to identify that they were actually nominated. And we're getting rid of that process. So why not just have either the link go directly to the athlete? So as you saw with Nick, we are looking for that email from the parent or guardian if they're under the age of 19, or directly from the athlete. And as soon as that nomination gets inputted, the athlete will receive an email to enroll. We recognize that not every athlete will enroll. They may not even know about CSI Pacific. So we will be working with the sports also to send out some messaging to help us guide those athletes towards enrollment. Why is enrollment important for us? If the athlete is receiving services or benefits or take advantage of the benefits that Anna will talk about earlier on, we did recognize a gap in our risk management processes around our waiver. So we've upheld a much more sort of legalized waiver, but we've also retained the athlete agreement. So those are 2 necessary parts that we have with the Institute if athletes are moving, using some of our benefits and services, but also capturing the data. And the point here is that in us trying to capture the data, one, it comes back to, can we better tell the story, but can we also share some of that data with you as a sport, and obviously within the nomination process as we go through from year on year, it will become a much simpler process in that you will have pre-populated nominations with a lot of this information already provided, and it's really only looking for those athletes that are new athletes to your targeted athlete list. So I just wanted to clarify that before Anna goes into the subscription piece.
Dave, Chris made a good comment here. Chris Acton from Speed Skating in the chat box. They've just gone through this process, and she got a lot of emails back from her athletes wondering if it was they were being emailed or invited to register, wondering if it was a scam. So I think the key for us and also PSOs is just that communication piece, that we do have a new process. So Chris, thanks for putting that in there.
All right, thanks, Dave. So I will just follow up with a couple of details around what subscription actually entails. So you can go to the next one. So moving forward into the 2023-2024 sports cycle, we recognize that there is a bit of delay on both our part and then delivery through Canada Post of just physical athlete cards just not making it in time, or getting delayed, or addresses changing quickly. So what we've pushed forward through this year is a digital card. So athletes that go through the enrollment piece and subscribe to the benefits and services will receive a digital card. We do also have the ability to print the physical cards, so it will always be a backup option, but to make sure that we're not delaying any of the athletes' access to any of the benefits or services, we're now trying to push forward with these digital cards as well. So our benefits and services has been pretty much the same in terms of an access point. We've got a web app that's updated quite regularly with new partnerships or changing partnerships and different access points. So in the bottom right hand corner, there is a QR code that leads you to the web app. And there's also the link, and in the bottom left-hand corner, that's what the new updated card looks like. All of our athletes and regional centers will receive kind of a consistent image of what that athlete card looks like. And then in terms of athletes, so we ask our athletes when they're renewing or registering. No, that's great. You can go to the next one. Kevin's going to pull up a Mentimeter. So we try and get a quarterly kind of feedback information from the athletes and coaches as they're going through renewal and registration, just to understand if our partnerships are relevant, are they using them, how can we better fulfill the gaps or services within their current training environments, and really how do we improve our services. So we do get that quite consistently from our athletes and coaches, but did want to kind of have an opportunity to hear from yourselves at the director level and just see if there's anything that you can recommend or that you're hearing from your athletes and staff and coaches of how we can kind of improve our services. So Kevin's going to pull up a Mentimeter here, and we just have a couple of questions here around if we have any existing partnerships that you think our athletes are using quite consistently, and then what the gaps are. Where can we reach out to our community partners and help our PSOs? So if you have Menti, you can feel free to head to menti.com, and then the code is 1243-4305. So our first question is, what existing partners do your athletes and coaches find beneficial? And again, if you're not familiar with some of our partnerships and services, some of them are level and benefits, level and region specific. So Pacific Sport Okanagan has a couple of different services, CSS Sports School, and then they've got a couple of different grants that are open throughout the year that maybe CSI Pacific doesn't offer. So it's good to kind of hear what people are using. Yeah, ferries, travel, food. Cool. We'll make sure we keep that. And then if we want to go to the next one. Yeah, some of the gaps that you've heard or maybe experienced for high performance support services for your athlete coaches or staff would be helpful for us to kind of look at our strategy pushing forward. Right. Yeah, the access to CSI nationally, we're actually the only provincial entity that works with our provincial development athletes, but Sport Canada carded and Canadian elite athletes do have access across the nation. So definitely something that we're working on or take back for feedback. Okay, and then I think there's one more. Yeah, just some insight on potential opportunities that can help your staff, coaches, and athletes from your perspective. And that's okay. It's okay if we don't have any feedback or input. But yeah, we usually send out a survey every quarter to the athletes and see what the insight is. More gyms, yep. Travel partners, yep. Telehealth is a good one, actually. Yeah. Looking at that. Okay, perfect. Well, Andrew, we'll skip over to the next one and we'll export that the feedback from Mentimeter after and add that to our partnership committee meetings just to see if it's in line with some of the athletes and coaches. The next two slides I'm just going to touch on as a refresher in terms of what athletes and coaches have available to them. So Andrew really leads the sport education curriculum for the province. So through being registered or subscribed to CSI Pacific, we do host a number of virtual and in-person speaker series and workshop opportunities throughout the year. So if you click the next two, in the bottom right-hand corner, it's also a link to the CSI Pacific website where you can kind of access this information and be directed back to the pages for our live events, which are linked through a calendar, and then the on-demand calendar. So all of our workshops and webinars, for the most part, there's a few in-person sessions that aren't recorded, but we do record and update a catalog of all these webinars and events for anyone to kind of access on their own time after those events have gone through. And then two more slides. Yeah, so I don't know if we do need to go through this next Menti, but Kevin will pop it up. Feedback from our athletes and coaches, which is pretty similar to some of the feedback that was just run up on the last Menti. In terms of speaker education topics and some gaps in our curriculum, Athletes have the top 4 from the renewal survey is mental performance topics, strength and conditioning, sport nutrition, and then branding and sponsorship. So I think we had about 1,000 athletes from PD2 up to our Sport Canada carded athletes. So this is pretty consistent in terms of the top 4 speaker education topics that athletes want to see moving into the year ahead. And then, so a couple of questions on the next Menti, just for us to kind of capture and take away and consider what are the other topics that we might have missed? And in terms of delivery, is there any success or kind of feedback approach to how we can deliver and engage more with your athletes, coaches and staff to make sure we're delivering content that's relevant to them?
Yeah, I wonder, Anna, if rather than do the Menti, if we would maybe just suggest that we're always looking for feedback on the things that we're doing and always looking for new and different ideas, and recognize that there'll be much more experience and much more information in the sector than the 2 of us in our brains. So if you've got any thoughts or comments around some of the things you'd like to see us do, or would want to see maybe specifically for your sport, please connect with us, because we're looking to build out our education piece and do as much as we can to support not just coaches, which is mostly my field, but also the athletes as well. We feel if we can get more information to them at a younger age, then they're able to make better decisions moving forward.
Perfect. And yeah, the last slide on here is just, again, a refresher of some of our supplementary programs. So each regional center has a few different opportunities for grants and bursaries. So it's really dependent on the region that the athlete or coach is registered with. Different events. So again, regionally, we host different athlete advances, Powering Podiums, RBC Training Ground, and different sport performance speaker series that are held throughout the year. And then a couple of different programs, just as a refresher, Canadian Sports School, Ignite, Podium Search, International Coaching School. Dave and Andrew are really involved with the UBC High Performance Coach and Leadership Master's Program, and as well as the Advanced Coaching Diploma. So QR code's there in the bottom right-hand corner if you want to save that link on your phone. But that's kind of just a quick overview of some of the services that we offer through our subscription programs.
Okay.
And Melissa, you've got a question?
Hi, Anna. Yeah, I just want to confirm something that you said. So carding, like for athletes that live and train in BC, they're eligible to be carded.
Yep. Carded with CSI Pacific.
CSI Pacific. Okay. And then athletes that live elsewhere but train in BC, are they eligible?
It depends where they are, like what level they're registered. Like periodically we'll have Sport Canada carded athletes visiting, but athletes that so it's really dependent on if they're Canadian Elite or Podium registered. So they have access to any of the Canadian sport institutes across the nation. If they're provincial development or Canadian development, BC is really the only one that manages those athletes, and we only manage BC athletes. So
okay, that answers the question. Okay, thank you.
Yep, no worries.
Just to give a context around that, Melissa, and thanks for asking the question. For example, as we know, sport is very facility rich, and the only sliding center that we have in the country is now located in BC as far as a full track. So we recognize that Bobsleigh Skeleton Canada has predominantly their training groups in Calgary, but they do come out to use our facilities. And in that sense, we do need to have them register or enroll with us because they are actually engaging us in our high performance gym space and what have you. So that's why we have to put some of that process in place. So I just wanted to give you an example. Corey.
Hi. I'd just like to get a summary of the process, just so that I understand it. So what I understand right now is that we're doing a nomination criteria. we fill in the spreadsheets, we nominate the athletes. What I'm unsure of is, will CSI Pacific now reach out via those emails directly to the athletes, or does the PSO have the ability to get the waivers completed and do that? We have a very robust registration process already, and I want to make this as seamless as possible. So I'm just not sure how we can proceed to make this.
Good question. And I think, Corey, it really comes down to some of those individual conversations that we can have with you as the PSO. But to clarify again, if you provide us with the email information for the athlete or the guardian, as soon as that nomination form is entered into the central registration system, it actually automatically sends an email out to the athlete. But as Christina mentioned, not everybody, unfortunately, I hope that everybody knows what CSI Pacific is. But as Christina mentioned, I mean, some of the athletes that went through this process with speed skating, they were like, well, what is this? So I think in cases where we can actually have a two-pronged approach, where yes, that can be an automated process, but in many cases, if we can get the PSO to help us to drive those athletes towards that enrollment. And again, I think from your perspective, you've got very robust enrollment capturing systems, I know in Swim BC, but in some cases, other PSOs don't have that ability to maybe capture some of the registration or the information that we're capturing. So we want to be able to have the ability to share that where appropriate with our partners.
Okay, and then the onboarding, so they'll receive these electronic waivers. Is there still, do they still have to do this process of meeting?
Yeah, so and with that, so we recognize that not every nominated athlete will enroll, but what we're hoping is that we're trying to increase the number of athletes that actually enroll within the Institute. Once they enroll in the Institute, that is just a data collection process. They still need to go through the intake or onboarding in order to receive an athlete card. And from a PSO perspective, only those athletes that are given a card can receive those benefits that Anna spoke to. So they have to have a valid card to receive the benefits. And of course, as the process hasn't changed, the in the term of eligibility, it's still 1 year. So after 1 year, they have to reapply based on the nominations that you submit us the next year. But again, Corey, that is another thing that we are looking for the PSOs to help us. If these benefits are important to you as a PSO and you feel that your athletes could benefit from it, then yes, once they enroll, the system will actually kick them forward into an asynchronous subscription phase where they have to just go through that. Currently, right now, that system is not up and running. So we are doing a workaround where we can contact the athletes and basically put them through an intake and still get them the card.
Is there an opportunity to do a center by center collective intake?
Yeah, I think group intakes are a great strategy. But as I mentioned, we're trying to really centralize this through more of an asynchronous onboarding. And we recognize, and I did want to acknowledge that we have many of our regional centers here, and they play such an integral role in helping to support the athletes in the region. But the process of onboarding is very time consuming. So by doing it in a more technologically efficient manner, we're hoping that more people will actually go through that onboarding and become subscribed, get that 1 year subscription. Because we're very diligent in collecting that information on their hometown and their region, that gives the opportunity for our regional centers to reach out to those athletes, to continue engaging those athletes. So there, as Anna mentioned, I mean, there's a lot of great benefits that some regions have to support those athletes.
Thank you.
One of the last comments I'll just make, it was interesting to see in the Mentimeter just the linkages with other institutes across the institute network. And as Anna mentioned, we do see a lot more of that fluidity once athletes are maybe targeted at a national team level or next gen level because of the centralization of training groups. But I would say that a really big topic amongst the institutes across Canada is how we're engaging athletes at the provincial level. So some of the institutes across Canada do have the ability to target athletes like we do. And as many of you are aware, there may be other programs in other provinces that have provincial government programs that help athletes. So that is a big piece at the moment. What I would like to see is that we all start to develop maybe a common data collection process, and that we're probably able to share that across. But as you can imagine, even within your own PSO, NSO realms, that consistent collection of data does tend to be a bit of a challenge in our Canadian sports system. But it was a great question on the Mentimeter, or a great comment on the Mentimeter, because that is something that we're looking at as an institute advantage to really help to support athletes both at the national level, but trying to understand how we can support athletes provincially.
Okay, so thank you everybody for your time today. There's a couple of questions in the chat box, and we'll be back in touch with people. But I think the key for us is to work with you in terms of communication to the athletes, to let athletes know that this process is changing a little bit for them. And then we're always able to connect with you to let you know which athletes and which coaches have registered. So that's something that we can do. So Dave, Dave or Kevin, if there's nothing else today, we can wrap up today.
Yeah, actually, Julie has a great question there. That has been a real challenge, Julie. I just read the question out so that everybody knows it. Is there a way that a PSO can find out which benefits their athletes have used? Now, we do ask the athletes to fill in what we call a renewal required survey, which gives us some insight into some of the services that or benefits that they are using. And certainly, I mean, we can provide information anonymized within your sport. For example, if you wanted to know, okay, how many of the athletes fill in that survey and what are they actually engaging in? What we're hoping to look into is the ability of the athlete card becoming more of a QR code in the future. So we're still a little ways away from that. So that's why when Anna showed you the card, it still has the athlete picture on it. But if we have this QR code, and you remember, we're still in the pandemic, sort of, but as we had to verify our vaccination status, that card becomes a live ability to scan the QR code. So in the future, what we're hoping is that some of our community partners will be able to scan those athlete cards, and that might give us a lot more information as to where the athletes are actually engaging specifically in our community partners, whether that's GymWorks or Food Stuff Partners or other things. But that's a little bit of vision into the future. Hopefully we'll have that rolled out in the next 6 to 12 months. But that was a great question. Thank you. Kevin Bowie, I just want to pass it over to you. I mean, really great to have the partnership with Via Sport and to recognize that we all work closely with Via Sport in a number of ways. And certainly from our perspective at CSI Pacific, we have a very close working relationship. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity to have a couple of final words.
Sure, no, Dave, I agree. Great partnership, and I think working hand in hand around stewarding this high performance structure, those who are in the enhanced excellence and those who are looking to try to join it or advance the conversation with government, like happy to hear from any and all of you at any time to help grow what you're doing from a high performance lens and work with CSIP collaboratively to sort of make that process happen as smoothly as possible. So yeah, call anytime. And thanks a lot for attending today.
Yeah, and just from me, thanks again for the collaboration that you bring to us at CSI Pacific and the work that we do together to try and further your athletes in high performance sport. So thank you very much for that. Great to see a lot of familiar names and faces. So looking forward to contacting many of you throughout the next 12 months. Andrew?
No, thanks everybody. Go Tigers, and we'll see all of you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you.